It's midnight. Your best friend is on your doorstep, eyes red, hands shaking. Story about how the woman he loved just gutted him. And you, because that's who you are, you open the door. You make him coffee. You walk upstairs and you tell your wife, hey, he needs us right now. And she's already awake, already dressed, already on her way down the stairs before you finish the sentence. I didn't think anything of it at the time. I should have thought everything of it. Marcus and I had been friends since we were 19. 2 cities, 3 jobs, every major milestone I had, he was in the room. He was the best man at my wedding, gave a toast that made Lauren cry in front of 140 people, called her the best thing that ever happened to me, looked me dead in the eye when he said it. I own a contracting business. Lauren worked from home doing design consulting. We had a house, a guest room we almost never used, and a marriage that had some friction in it. Not unusual, not dangerous, just the kind of real-life grinding that happens when 2 people are trying to build something and don't always agree on how to do it. We argued about priorities, about me working long hours, about her feeling like I was emotionally somewhere else even when I was standing in the same room. The kind of stuff you talk through with your best friend when you need to make sense of it. I talked to Marcus about all of it. Our arguments, my doubts, her frustrations, my shortcomings, or what I thought were my shortcomings. I told him things about my marriage that I had not said to anyone else, and he listened. He was so good at listening. His girlfriend Cassie had cheated on him. That was the story. 2 years in, she'd been sleeping with someone from her gym for 4 months, and Marcus found out through a string of texts he accidentally saw when she left her phone on the counter. He showed up at my door looking like a man who'd been turned inside out, unshaved, pale, couldn't quite hold a thought. And something in me, because this was my brother as far as I was concerned, just opened everything up. Stay as long as you need. The guest room is yours. We are here. Lauren didn't wait for me to ask her to help. She was already in the kitchen. I remember coming in to find she'd made a full meal, not snacks, an actual meal, like she'd known, like she'd been preparing. She sat with him that first night for almost 2 hours while I fell asleep on the couch. When I woke up, I could hear her voice, low and steady, saying, "You deserve so much better than that." I remember thinking, God, I married well. That memory has a different texture now. What I know now is that Lauren was awake before Marcus knocked, that she'd had her phone in her hand, that the fresh towels already folded and stacked in the guest room, the ones she told me she'd grabbed while I was on the phone, had been put there before he arrived. She knew he was coming. He told her first. The first 2 weeks looked like grief management. Marcus barely surfaced. Lauren would bring food to his door, sit in the hallway and talk through it when he didn't want to come out. She was warm in a crisis. Always had been. It was one of the things I genuinely loved about her. By week 3, he was joining us for dinner, watching TV with us, moving through our house like it was his, and I was buried in a big project at work, early mornings, late nights, so I'd come home and they'd already be mid-conversation, mid-show, mid-something, and I'd sit down and slot into a dynamic they had already established for the evening. I noticed it, but I told myself it was fine. He needed normalcy. She was providing it. That's what we'd agreed to. But somewhere in week 4, things started feeling different in a way I couldn't name yet. Small things. A quality to the air when I walked into a room they were in. Not a temperature difference, more like a pressure difference. Like the room had been doing something and stopped when I entered it. A Tuesday. I came home early, side door, kitchen, and they were sitting at the table. Nothing was happening, they were just there. But the second I walked in, both of them stopped talking at exactly the same moment. Not like people who hear a door and pause, more like a circuit that got cut. Marcus picked up his phone and looked at it. Lauren stood up. She said, "Hey, you're home early." That word, early. Not, "Hey, you're home." Early. Like my schedule was the variable. like my house had a normal and I had disrupted it. I asked what they were talking about. Lauren said a show she'd been watching. Which show? She named one. I said nothing. Let it go. 3 days later, I was in the garage and the kitchen window was open. I could hear them in there. And the tone, not the words, just the tone, was the kind of quiet that people use when they are sharing something they haven't decided to share with the world yet. That specific hush. I know what regular conversation sounds like. This wasn't it. This was people talking into each other. I went inside. They were laughing. Lauren immediately swung me into the joke like nothing was happening. I smiled, went to bed. Told myself I was paranoid. I was doing exactly what they needed me to do. By week 6, I had stopped sleeping well. There were a dozen of these moments by then, and no single one proved anything, but together they were building a shape I didn't want to look at directly. He had a nickname for her. Something easy, something that had the texture of habit. The way you abbreviate someone's name after you've said it enough times that the full version starts to feel formal. She called him Mark. I'd known this man for over a decade. Nobody called him Mark. But she did, without thinking, the way you talk to someone your mouth has gotten used to. There was a night Lauren and I had a small fight. Petty stuff. I said something dismissive, she got cold. We went to bed without resolving it. Normal couple friction. The next morning, Marcus knew. He didn't say he knew, but he was careful with me in that particular way people are when they know you're having a hard time, but don't want to make it obvious they know. A little extra warmth, a pointed comment about how some people express care differently, just hung there, unprompted. She'd told him about our fight. In the middle of the night, or first thing in the morning, she'd relayed the details of a private argument to the man sleeping in our guest room. And he had said nothing to me about it, stored it, filed it away. And then, this is the one that sits with me the strangest, her phone. Lauren used to leave her phone everywhere. Counter, couch, table, charging in the kitchen overnight. That was just how she was. Around week 5, it changed. The phone started coming everywhere she went. And when she did set it down, it was always face down. Always. Not occasionally. Every single time, face down on the surface, like she'd trained herself to do it without thinking. I noticed this and didn't say anything for 11 days. One night I came downstairs for water and found them in the living room with the lights off and the TV barely audible. Not touching. Not even sitting that close. But the room had that sealed-off feeling, like I had walked into a conversation that had already become its own little world. Lauren looked up and said, "Can't sleep?" in that distracted, half-guilty tone people use when they were somewhere else a second ago. Marcus didn't even really look at me. He just said she was helping him process some stuff. At midnight. In the dark. In my house. And somehow I was the one who felt like I'd interrupted something. I finally brought it up. Carefully. No accusations, just, "Hey, I've been feeling a little off about some things. Can we talk?" Lauren didn't get defensive. She did something more effective than defensive. She got wounded. This slow, quiet collapse into hurt, like I had said something genuinely cruel. She looked at me and said, "So you're accusing me?" And then, "Marcus is going through the worst period of his life, and you're threatened by that? By your best friend?" She didn't answer a single thing I'd actually said. She reframed the entire conversation so that the subject became my character, my jealousy, my smallness. And she was so calm doing it, so steady, like she'd thought about how this conversation would go and had prepared. The worst part is it worked. I apologized. I backed down completely, sat there and told my wife I was sorry for feeling uneasy in my own home. Because when someone you love looks at you with that specific flavor of disappointment, something in you collapses before your brain can catch up. I told Marcus about it later. I don't know why. Maybe I thought he could help me understand what I was feeling. He shook his head and said, "Man, you know Lauren, she would never." Said it with this rock-steady eye contact. Not warm, not surprised, steady. The steadiness of someone who had already run this scenario, who knew exactly what I was going to say, and had the answer polished and ready. The two of them had clearly talked about how to handle me, sitting in my house, at my table, having a conversation about how to manage me if I started noticing things. I know that now. Here's what I didn't understand until later, and I need you to sit with this for a second. During weeks 5 through 8, the weeks when my gut was screaming and I was working to silence it, Lauren got warmer. Not guilty warmer, strategically warmer. She made more effort. She told me she loved me more often. There was a weekend she planned this whole day for us. Nice restaurant, walk after, the kind of intentional romance we hadn't done in a while. And I felt it. I thought, maybe we're turning a corner. Maybe she's trying. Maybe I've been so buried in work that I haven't seen the effort she's been putting in. That warmth was not reconciliation. That warmth was a controlled environment. She was keeping me stable, managing my temperature, making sure I felt just cared for enough not to look too carefully at what was happening 4 walls away from wherever she was keeping me occupied. She used love as a tool, not in a crazy cinematic way, just quietly, surgically, and it worked better than almost anything else they could have done. 8 weeks in, Instagram message, Cassie. I almost deleted it without reading it. But something, the same thing that had been sending quiet signals for 2 months, made me open it. She said she'd been debating sending it for a while, said she knew it wasn't her place, said she thought if the situation were reversed, she'd want someone to tell her. Then she told me that Marcus had not just found out about her cheating. She said he had been emotionally checked out for months before that she had suspected something had shifted in him, that there were nights she'd pretended to sleep while he lay next to her with his phone, screen angled away. That one night she'd seen a name come up repeatedly in his messages, Lauren. She said their breakup didn't begin with her infidelity. It began with his. That the story he told at my door, the heartbroken man who'd been betrayed, was a version of events that had been built around a detail he'd removed from it. She said she thought I should know. I sat in a hardware store parking lot and read that message 4 times. My hands were completely still. That's the part I remember most, how still my hands were. I drove home without telling either of them I was coming, parked down the street, walked to the side door, let myself in without making a sound. Not because I was thinking strategically, but because my body had already decided what to do and my mind was just along for it. Living room empty, TV off. I heard something from the back of the house, the hallway toward the guest room. The guest room door was open, about a third of the way. And what was on the other side of it was not ambiguous, not something I could talk myself around, not a moment that needed interpreting. My wife and my best friend, in the room I had made up for him the night he stood on my porch with red eyes and a carefully constructed story. But the thing that hit hardest, harder than the image, harder than the sound, was the room itself. Because it didn't look like someone's temporary guest room anymore. There were her things in there. Not all of them, but enough. A candle on the nightstand, her reading glasses, a book, a charger. The specific geography of a space that 2 people have shared enough times that they've stopped being careful about what they leave behind. This was not a mistake that happened once. This was a place they went. A second life they had built inside mine, with furniture and habits and a rhythm, right there in the room down the hall from where I slept. Lauren saw me first. And her face, I'll never stop seeing this, went through this rapid, layered sequence of reactions. Shock, then shame, then something I can only describe as calibration. In under 2 seconds, she had decided who she was going to be in this moment, what she was going to say, how to position it. That's not guilt. That's practice. Marcus didn't look at me for a long time. Here is what I've assembled since then. I want you to really take this in. Marcus did not come to me because he was destroyed by Cassie's infidelity. He came to me because he needed a location and a cover story. The relationship with Lauren had been building before he knocked on my door. There were messages between them, I found this out later, exchanged in the weeks before he showed up. She knew he was coming. She had arranged it. The guest room she made up spontaneously while I was on the phone had been prepared before he arrived. He walked into my house already inside it. Every dinner we shared, every night I came home and slotted into whatever evening they'd already established. Every conversation where he sat across from me and looked me in the eye and talked about trust and loyalty, he was doing it from inside something he had engineered. He had studied the architecture of my marriage through every private conversation I'd ever trusted him with, and then he had used it. He knew exactly where my wife felt unseen. He knew exactly what language to use. I had given him the blueprint. The heartbreak story wasn't entirely false. He was probably hurting, a little, in the way that people who have already moved on can still briefly mourn the thing they're leaving. But it was also an entry point, a way to get inside the house legally, with sympathy as his clearance. He arrived through my compassion. He stayed through my trust. He built something in my home while I was out paying for the home. And here's what I think about when I think about Lauren. She did not drift into this. She did not get lonely and make a slow, confused mistake that one thing led to another. She made active decisions, repeatedly, over the course of 2 months, in a house where I was present. She sat across from me at dinner, in the warmth she was manufacturing, and looked at me like a woman who loved her husband. She came to bed at night, after whatever time she'd spent with him, and lay next to me and probably slept fine. She had that one conversation, the one where she made me feel paranoid and small and selfish for noticing, and she had it calmly enough that I apologized. She managed me like a variable in a problem she was solving. Some people, when they hear this story, feel sorry for her. They say she seems so unhappy that I must not have seen it. And maybe that's partially true. But I would like to point out who was telling people about Lauren's unhappiness. It was Marcus, my best friend, who had spent a year hearing every crack in my marriage and used each one to shape a narrative that made what they were doing feel inevitable, feel earned, feel like rescue instead of theft. He wasn't just having an affair with my wife. He was running a reputation campaign against my marriage. Slowly. Over dinners, over the phone, to anyone who would listen. Building a world where by the time anyone found out, the verdict was already in. Was she happy? Maybe not. But she chose how to handle that. And what she chose was to help deceive me. Actively. Daily. For months. When everything came apart, Lauren told me she had felt alone for a long time. That I was emotionally unavailable. That Marcus understood her in ways I hadn't tried to. She said it wasn't meant to hurt me. She said it just happened. She used the phrase, something real, like that was a defense. Like real is a category that excuses the method of getting there. Marcus said he was sorry. Said he hadn't planned for it to go this far. Said he'd been in a dark place and Lauren was the only light in it. Then, and I want you to really hear this, he said he loved me like a brother. After everything. He looked at me and he said that. Neither of them said, you deserved better than what we did in your home. Neither of them said, there is no justification for this. Because people who are genuinely sorry say those things without being asked. These two were sorry about the situation they were now in. They were performing damage control, not contrition. And even in that, they were doing it together. Same framing, same deflection points. Same emphasis on loneliness and realness and connection, like they'd agreed on the script before I walked into the room. They probably had. Cassie reached out again, about 3 weeks after everything collapsed. We talked for a long time. She is sharper than either of them ever gave her credit for, which I think was also by design. She told me that in the last months of their relationship, Marcus had become oddly focused on my marriage. He would ask what she thought Lauren was like. He'd say things like, I get the sense they're not really that happy, you know? I think he checked out a long time ago. Planting it. Testing the narrative, building a version of my marriage in other people's minds that made it feel like something already ending, so that when the right moment arrived, nobody would call it theft. They'd call it timing. And then the piece that I still feel in my chest when I think about it. He had told Lauren, at some point during those weeks in my house, in whatever conversations they were having that would go quiet when I walked in, that I had confided in him that I wasn't sure the marriage was working. that Cassie had eventually heard this from people who knew people, that Marcus had apparently said something like, "He told me himself he's not sure he's still in it." I never said that. What I said was that we were struggling, that communication was hard, that I was trying to figure out how to do better. Marcus took those words, my own words, given in trust, in private, and somewhere in a conversation I was not part of, he reshaped them into something that told my wife I had already quit on her, that what he was offering wasn't betrayal. It was an alternative to a man who'd already mentally left. He didn't just take my wife. He used my own voice to give her permission to let him. Marcus and Lauren are together now, living together from what I've heard. Some of our mutual friends think it's actually sort of beautiful. Two people who found something real in a difficult situation. I've heard the word genuine used to describe them by people who know the full story and have chosen their camp. I don't feel what I expected to feel. It's not rage. It's something colder and more permanent than rage. It's the feeling that comes from understanding, with complete clarity, what you actually were to two people you would have done anything for. To Marcus, I was infrastructure, a warm house, an open door, a man trusting enough to leave the lights on and ask no questions. He didn't want a life with Lauren, he wanted access. He wanted a conquest that came with a backstory that made him the hero. He wanted the thrill of taking something that belonged to someone who trusted him completely, because that specific kind of taking, with someone watching, with someone close enough to be hurt, is the whole point for men like him. To Lauren, I was a placeholder she had the patience to stay next to. She kept the house comfortable and the marriage functional and the presentation clean while she waited for the door to open. And when it did, she held it open herself, from the inside, and then looked surprised that I noticed the draft. I let him in that night because I believed he was broken. He was not broken. He was building, and I handed him everything he needed to do it. My house, my trust, my marriage's most private fractures, and called it friendship. My kindness was not a virtue they overlooked. It was a resource they budgeted for. They knew exactly what they were doing in my home, and they did it anyway, every single day, in the room down the hall, while I slept. People love calling stories like this tragic, complicated, real, but I know exactly where it started. It started with my wife already awake for another man before he ever knocked on my front door. I just happened to be the one stupid enough to open it.